Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our introductory webinar on Microsoft Copilot. This is going to be a lot of fun today. We're going to take just a couple of minutes at the very beginning to talk about Copilot. Then we're going to go into a series of demos to illustrate some different capabilities and expanding functionality that Microsoft Copilot has. We're also going to talk about some of the caveats that we've learned as we've worked with it. And so I think it's going to be worthwhile for all of us to go. If you have any questions, feel free to contact us, Custom Internet Services, steve@custominternet.biz. Contact information is at the end of the webinar, or if you're watching it on YouTube, it's in the YouTube notes and things that you can find there. If you have any questions on this as we go through, feel free to post those in the question and answer box, as we'll try to get to those at the end. And I wouldn't be surprised, I'm sure there'll be some questions here on this. If you're watching this on YouTube and you have questions and comments, feel free to contact us if there's something we can help you with. So without further ado, let's get into our introductory session on Microsoft Copilot and talk about just what this is and what it means to each one of us. So let's begin. What is Microsoft Copilot? When we talk about Microsoft Copilot, part of the confusing stuff is that there are many different Copilot environments. If you've got a Windows 11 machine, you've got a basic consumer Copilot there. If you've used Bing, you've seen Copilot. If you're talking about different security features or different functionality in administration consoles, you've got different Copilots there. What we're talking about is the Microsoft Copilot today that focuses on being part of the Microsoft 365 environment, and specifically the Copilot that works with the various applications. So this is not the same as either the consumer Copilot that you find. It's not the same totally as the Copilot you can find through the web. Rather, this is going to be the Copilot that's built out to work with the Microsoft 365 apps. And so as we talk about what it does with regards to the Microsoft 365 environment, Copilot does a number of things. It's designed to be an intelligent assistant. To me, for my personal use, this is probably one of the most important features that Copilot has, as it works as an intelligent assistant, and we'll talk about some of those that functionality later. It's also designed to enhance productivity. So whereas you might take a while to create a marketing piece or to create a presentation for something or whatever, Copilot can help you summarize this information and get something put together more quickly. We'll demonstrate this in a little bit. But the interesting thing about Microsoft 365 Copilot, and this is what separates us from the consumer version as well as from other items, is it is designed to incorporate both your documents and the web information. Now, what this means is that Microsoft 365 Copilot has access to the documents that you have access to. It's going to follow the same security measures that you have as you have access to it. And so it's going to be able to incorporate that information into what it creates for you. This is one of the big things that separates it from the other AIs that are out there, is this emphasis on security and on keeping your information secure and not making it out to the rest of the world. We'll talk about that a little bit more as we go on. So as we stop today to talk about Microsoft 365 Copilot, I'd like to start out with a series of demos to help us see some of the functionality that's there. And we're going to go through a series of 3 demos. The 3 demos are designed to use the Microsoft 365 apps that you have. But the demos are also designed to showcase different functionality that you can create. And so as we go through these different demos that we have here, beginning first off with the Copilot app and then going into Word and PowerPoint, I'm going to show you some of the ways that Copilot increases its function, increases your productivity, but also talk about some of the caveats that we've discovered as we've worked through this. So let's begin with the Microsoft 365 app. If you've got Microsoft 365 Copilot as a subscription, you have access to this web app. And the access to this web app basically gives you an interface where you can do a whole slew of things and ask a whole lot of components. One thing you can do with Copilot is that you can ask Copilot how to use Copilot. And for me, that has been really useful to ask it questions and then have it help me learn how to do things based upon the responses that it gives. So let's begin. A key to using any kind of AI, whether it's Copilot or something else, is going to be the question of writing prompts. And a prompt is basically the question that you put in and the output that you hope to get. So let's ask Copilot this simple question. What are the components of a good prompt? Now, note that in this prompt box, I've got locations where I can add other content if I want Copilot to consider documents I've created. I've got other items that let me interact with the prompts and how to handle it. But for now, let's just start out with this. What are the components of a good prompt? And immediately Copilot is going to go out looking for an answer, come back with this response. The good prompt typically includes several key components. Note that it talks about the instruction, what it is that you're asking it to do, something about the context that you have, and we'll talk about that more in the next prompt that's coming up. Something about the input data that you're asking for, and then what it is that you want it to produce, or sometimes that's referred as the output, what it is that you're looking for. What took me one of the longest things to learn was how to create prompts that were somewhat effective. That was a challenge for me to learn. So asking Copilot here how to use it, asking it what the components are of a good prompt, comes up with these kinds of questions. Note that the bottom Copilot lists the references that it used as it created the response. Now, this is going to be the first caveat that we need to understand. In working with Copilot, and other AIs too, not just Copilot, it seems like it sometimes has a problem distinguishing between primary and secondary sources. So as you look at your results that you get from Copilot, your summaries or answers, just keep that in mind. Well, let's expand what we're asking Copilot to do. And let's expand it and ask a different prompt, something like this. Okay, I was reading the other day and found out an interesting question. I've heard that quantum particles are located deep in the brain. Is this true? Well, we submit that prompt to Copilot. It's going to do research for me. Now, this is, for me, one of the more useful ways the Copilot works, is that it is able to go summarize information from a whole slew of different websites and different documents, and come up with a summary. And I find that helpful because it means I don't have to go look at everything myself. And it even tells me where it found that particular answer and information at, and then summarize what it found right here. But once again, like I said, you have to question and you have to evaluate the sources that it used. Are those really the sources that you want it to use and want it to be involved with? Well, let's go consider something else with Microsoft Copilot. That's fun, there's no question about it, but let's go consider something else. Let's say that we're going to use the Copilot that's built into Microsoft Word. Now, immediately you'll notice you've got Copilot up here in the corner. And if I click that, that's going to open up a panel on the right-hand side where I can interact with Copilot. Likewise, I've got the Copilot icon here that I can interact with. And so I'm going to ask Copilot to be a little creative for me. I'm going to ask it to help me out. Let's suppose that I'm a typical male and I've got a problem with remembering my wife's wedding anniversary. And so I asked Copilot to help me out. My 10th wedding anniversary is coming next week. Please write a haiku of love to my wife. And then we click the enter, and here it goes. And in a minute, it's going to pop up with my haiku of love. Now, the interesting thing I found about that is that every time I've used this particular prompt, and I've used this prompt a number of times, it's always come up with something different. Okay, some of your AIs, you'll hear people talk about that if you use the same prompt, you get the same results. But at least with Copilot, as I've tried to test his creativity, I've used the same prompt multiple times, but never come up with exactly the same answer. So we're going to go ahead and keep that particular prompt, and that looks like a good idea all the way around. Well, let's suppose that instead of that prompt with regards to something so I don't get in trouble with my wedding anniversary, let's suppose I'm looking at something different and looking at the possibility of purchasing an asset, and I want to know how that's going to work. And so in this case, I'm going to give it the prompt here that I would like to purchase an automatic car wash. Please create a business plan for such a purchase. Whoops, did I not hit that right? There we go. That was my mistake. So immediately when I hit generate on this, Copilot is going to go out and create an initial business plan. Obviously, the business plan is going to lack all sorts of specifics. And that's one of the other caveats to keep in mind with regards to using Copilot, that unless it has access to your data, or you have included a file that has certain parameters like what these costs are here, it's going to come up with an estimate based on what it's able to find, and then it's going to create this document for you. So what it ends up with, unless you provide it with more specific data, is going to be a generalized result that is good and has a lot of good information in it. And then you're probably going to have to go back and tweak that in order to make it customized to exactly what it is that you want. And that's okay. Even just creating this initial document and the formatting and a bunch of the stuff that's in here can cut your time as you're creating new documents. So things like business summaries or things like marketing collateral or evaluations on what you want to do as a business. For example, I took it recently and asked it based on our business what it would do to increase profit for the next year. And it came up with a strategy on things that it would do. It can do a lot of that, and we'll find a lot of that kind of stuff coming up in the next prompt here. But while this particular type of document may not be something you would want to use immediately word for word, it can cut out your time significantly by creating the frameworks, creating a bunch of the types of things you would want in it, and then letting you come back to customize it later on and figure out just what you want based upon that customization. And I thought that's pretty cool. But let's go down to Microsoft PowerPoint. This is probably my favorite one here. So if I've got Microsoft PowerPoint here, and let's go down and bring down. Notice I've got Copilot listed up here in the corner. And with Microsoft PowerPoint, it's going to be just a little bit different on what I do. Let's say that as I'm using Microsoft PowerPoint, that I want it to create a short presentation. The demo prompt that I created here, paste it in. The demo prompt that I created begins like this. Please create a short presentation on the past, present, and future of 4-H. Highlight why these clubs are important and the value that they provide to young people. Now, if I had to create that presentation from scratch, there would be a lot of repetitive work going into it. But let's go ahead and ask it to create the presentation for me based upon this. Copilot's busy thinking, and in a minute, it's going to create a whole bunch of slides with information on them. All right, we're still working. By the way, if any of you have questions as we go through this, feel free to drop them into the question and answer box, as that would be quite appropriate. We'd love to see that. Okay, so the presentation's done. And note that as I look at this presentation, it's provided graphics, provided something of the text and comments that I should have. Now, one additional caveat with Copilot to keep in mind. We've discovered that even though like Copilot in the presentation creates or inputs a lot of graphics right here, these are not necessarily copyright-free graphics that you're allowed to use. We did a presentation, actually this presentation, and Copilot created for me some graphics, and it turned out what it did was it copied some stuff that was already out there that was indeed belonging to an agency. So if you're going to use this and use the graphics, keep in mind that you may need to do a reverse image search or something. You can't just assume that the graphics it creates are copyright free. But with that in mind, if you use the image designer with Microsoft, designer.microsoft.com, or one of these other image generators like Midjourney or some of the others, the graphics that you create there should be unique. So just kind of keep that in mind as you look through this. Well, looking at my presentation that was created, there's a lot of good information on things like history and founding, what it does, activities, and all that. And that looks all very good all the way around. But as Copilot told me down here in the bottom, it said, if you'd like, Designer has other layout options to consider. Well, besides Designer, I also have other options to consider. So let's go ahead and hit Designer, and let's see what in the world it's going to do. And note that as I look at some presentation options, it will look at items on individual slides, which is good. Likewise, if I come back up here to Design and choose a different theme for this, there we go. Okay, let's apply this theme to all the slides. And immediately things have changed in the way they look. Then if I choose, I want to come over here and even change the color scheme just a little bit. Let's pick this one right here. Note that by the time I'm done, I've really got a unique or a different presentation than what I began with. And it definitely looks much more adaptable and like something I would want to use. So the point is, as I look at Copilot within these different Office 365 apps, there's a lot that it can do to cut my time, to cut my research time, to cut my creative time, couldn't hardly talk there, and do these things as it sits there and works for me. So let's go back and let's look at Microsoft Copilot then once again. As you read about Copilot, and indeed as I've used it over the past several months, it turns out that one of the best ways that I found to use Microsoft Copilot is to simply treat it as your subject matter expert on a variety of topics. I find myself, as I create prompts, even using words like please and thank you. I know that sounds stupid, doesn't it? But I find that I actually do that. And so as you use Microsoft 365 Copilot, and if you treat it as your subject matter expert on a variety of stuff, and realize that even the best subject matter expert doesn't know everything, likewise, Copilot does not know everything. One of the best ways you can get out of it the best information is to put your focus on writing good prompts. As Copilot told us at the beginning in the first demo, part of the focus of writing good prompts is on the instruction. What am I asking it to do? Something of the context. Remember in the demo on the business plan, I told I was thinking about buying a car wash. That would be part of the context that you would have within a prompt. And then input data. We really didn't use that, but it's totally possible to use input files, or it has access to the files that are within your Office 365 environment. And then tell what kind of output I'm looking for. Am I looking for a poem, like when I told it I wanted a haiku? Am I looking for a presentation, like we did when we used PowerPoint to create a presentation? Those kinds of things, telling it, emphasizing the good prompt aspect is one of the most important things to using Copilot, so you get data that's decent out of it. But then you still got to go through and validate the final output, whether it's the question of are we using primary or secondary sources, whether it's the question of do we think it used reputable or non-reputable sources, those are both important, whether we think that it's using imagery that is copyrighted or that it created again and is available under some kind of CCL license. All those questions come into play. And then we have to take the product that came from Copilot and turn around and customize it as appropriate. Nothing is going to be good just right as you are, but everything is going to have some kind of tweaking done on that, some kind of tweaking for it to be done. Okay, I see we're getting some questions coming in, and that is good. We'll have some time at the end to handle those and talk about them. But let's talk about one final very important thing, and this is what separates Microsoft Copilot from many of the other items, from many of the other AI models that you find out there. And this is really important. And this has to do with Microsoft 365 Copilot security. Okay, so you probably heard that as the different AIs were coming into prominence over time, you probably heard questions about whether or not your data was secure within all of those. And you had questions about whether, you probably heard questions about whether or not other businesses would have it, or whether or not this data was being used at training for a new model, or just what it was. Well, Microsoft 365 Copilot, because it is integrated and tied closely into the Microsoft environment, allows us to have a number of important things. Starts out, number one. Whoops, that was the wrong direction. Number one, Microsoft 365 Copilot has advanced threat detection. You can bet it's only a matter of time as people are learning ways to use AI for bad purposes. And so because of that, Microsoft Copilot has built into it advanced threat detection to help prevent and keep those kinds of things from happening. Perhaps one of the most important things is that 365 Copilot follows the internal Microsoft graph, so it obeys the controls that you have put on your data. This is what separates 365 Copilot from many of the other AIs that are out there. Many of the other AIs, if you want them to have access to your data, you have to copy files into it, or you have to drag and drop data. And the problem is you don't have any control on where that data is going to go, and nothing that goes ahead and says that it is definitely coming to be protected. But in the Microsoft 365 environment, Copilot follows the access controls on your data. So you may have access to some files that one of your coworkers doesn't have access to. And because you've got access to those files, a prompt with your Copilot will use that data that you have access to, while the same prompt from one of your coworkers would have access to other data that they had access to within their environment. So it's pretty important that you go ahead and understand that it has the access controls. And this is a really big deal from a security perspective. Probably the fourth thing that Copilot guarantees to do is to have full data encryption, both data encryption in transit as well as data encryption at rest, so that your data that goes into Copilot is encrypted and not supposedly available for everybody else. But then probably the fourth thing that I would mention on this is that Copilot is continuously learning. If you've used this any time in any of the other AIs, you've undoubtedly seen that it has greatly increased in capability over just the few months that it's been out and going. And this is true. And as I've worked with it and watched it, it has greatly increased in its capabilities over this time. Now we're going to get to questions in just a couple of minutes. But let me mention one last thing, that if you would like to see the replay, this will be posted up on our YouTube channel shortly. Likewise, there is a handout to this that is available. You can see the link. If you are signed up and on this webinar live right now, you're going to be receiving an email which will include the links as well as the link to the handout. And in that handout, there's an additional link to a document on our website that gives some more general information on AI and some more use. It's really a pretty good document all the way around. And likewise, if you've got questions or would like to talk more about this, you can see our contact information there below. Easiest ways to send an email to support@custominternet.biz. And if you are considering breaking into the Microsoft Copilot world and thinking about this for your business, right now, and this is January 2025, right now, Microsoft is running some special deals on implementation of this. So if you would like to consider that more and talk about how that might go ahead and benefit your organization, we'd love to chat with you and talk about this. Okay, so let's talk about questions. And if you've got any more questions, feel free to talk to me. First question says, I noticed when I click Copilot in Excel, it said it only worked with files in SharePoint or OneDrive, and this is true. So if you've got files that are someplace else, you would need to copy them into that environment, because going back to the security on the Microsoft Graph, it's going to be limited to the security parameters wrapped around your stuff. So you would need to be sure that whatever you're looking for it to access wasn't one of those 2 points. So that means that if you've been using something traditionally like one of the main share file products out there to keep things in other than in SharePoint, the easiest way to make all of this data accessible is to think about a migration from whatever share file product is being used to the SharePoint environment. And with the right permissions on, that will then make that stuff accessible to SharePoint. If that's something that you want to talk about, give us a call afterwards. We'd be happy to talk to you about how that kind of a process could work and how that could happen. Oh, a few minutes ago, came up with another question. It said, you're probably coming to this, but is Copilot a free service? Okay, there is a Copilot that is free. So if you use bing.com, you can find free Copilot. However, the difference is it will not have access to all of your files and all of your stuff that's in your Microsoft 365 environment. So it's basically going to have access to web information, and it will be able to answer. By the way, interesting thing you might want to do sometime is ask Copilot what the most recent data has that's accessible on the web, and whether it's Copilot, ChatGPT, OI, or any of these other AI services. That's kind of an interesting thing to do. So there is a free Copilot. It is not as fully functional as the one that's built in, and the free Copilot does not work with things like PowerPoint, Excel, Word, those kinds of apps that are there on that. And you're right, you've used similar AI platforms that are there. That's good. They're good, but there's a monthly charge. There is a graphic version of Microsoft's AI called Designer, designer.microsoft.com. You'll need a personal, not a business Microsoft account to use it. And it creates some interesting imagery. So if you want to use something like that, I'd probably point you to that. If you're using some of the other platforms like Canva, they are including AI generators within those more all the time. So you definitely have something there. By the way, if any of my other co-presenters want to add something to that topic, feel free to add it into chat too. Last question, I said, curious also about other generative functions, such as imagery, layout, or design. Copilot 365, for example, can take your Excel spreadsheet and make it look really nice for a presentation. Or we've talked about generative functions as we used PowerPoint just a few minutes ago to create something. So yes, there are generative functions built into it that are there, and there are more coming all the time. I see we've got some other users typing in here, so we'll just give it a minute for those to go ahead and come on. Any other questions that anyone would like to join in the conversation on with regards to Copilot? When I will admit, when I first started using Copilot about a year ago, I was not impressed with it. But I will admit that the last few months, as it has improved, that I've become more a fan of it. And as I've learned more about its limitations and capabilities, it is not the end-all be-all, but it is another tool that can help you get kick-started on the creative process many times of what you're trying to do. All right. Very cool. I use PowerPoint occasionally, but mostly the Mac equivalent. Can generated imagery and copy, as you just demonstrated, be modified to include hyperlinks and then used as an internet landing page? Yes, it can. Okay, and that would kind of depend upon just exactly how your website was being developed. But yes, you can use this as a starter for a lot of your web stuff. That is exactly correct on that. All right. Well, I see we've got one other individual typing in, so we'll just hang on for a minute or two. All right. Well, I hope this has been a helpful webinar. If you have any questions, feel free to get in touch with us. Phone number 620-221-3614. Easiest is to email support at custominternet.biz. And if you're interested in implementing SharePoint within your particular business environment, feel free to do that. One other question came in. Does Copilot have any function with Microsoft Outlook to pull invoices and emails? Okay, I don't know about that specifically, but I'm sure that we didn't talk about this today. Copilot lets you create what they call agents. And basically, an agent is a little specific job function that you want to be accomplished repetitively. So if I've got something I do a lot, then I would create an agent to just sit there and do it automatically so I don't have to do it. My guess is that I've not tried this, but I would bet we can create an agent in Copilot that would do that, that would pull invoices from emails. I would bet we can do that. All right. Any other questions? Well, then, for all of you that were on here, thank you very much. And if we can help you with your Copilot implementations, feel free to give us a call. We'd love to assist you. Thanks. Goodbye.